So I've talked about some of the challenges, but it even gets a little harder. Because, you know, we warriors are a tough nut to crack. It might take some work. We don't normally just welcome you with open arms when you want to come alongside us. Sometimes you've got to try hard. And let me tell you some reasons why. A lot of times there are barriers for our warriors that they put up to get help, even though there can be help available. First of all, you know, the stigma. What would it mean if a Marine went and got counseling? It would mean they're weak. That's the stigma. That's what they think. That's what they think warriors are supposed to be strong. I don't need to get help. So there's that stigma about it to begin with. When I go around the country, one of the things I tell people is, look, you've never been trained how to come home. You need coaching. You need coaching on how to come home. I just take that whole counseling word and throw it out the window. Use the word coaching. They need coaching to come back, and that can help them massively. There's also a lack of resources or a lack of information. There are tons of resources on the internet that we'll look at later. There's tons of resources out there, but also the VA is so overwhelmed. I've heard multiple times people being suicidal, wanting to get an appointment. And yeah, they get an appointment a month and a half later. Day late, dollar short. That sometimes the VA system is way too overwhelmed. Then there's denial. Warriors are trained to be strong, be tough. They don't feel pain. There's nothing wrong. They're trained to override these symptoms while at war. Well, it doesn't stop when they come home. They just deny the symptoms. They don't think anything's wrong. They don't think anything's, happening. They're okay. Not to worry. There's also a major sense of distrust for our warriors. First of all, they don't trust their fellow military personnel, because if they went and got help, they think another military person would then turn them in, and that could affect their careers. They don't trust them. Well, guess what? They don't trust civilians either. It's kind of a no-win situation, because they think civilians can't possibly have a clue about what they've been through at war. And warriors have experienced such incredible traumas, and they've witnessed and partaked in so many kinds of deaths and killings and seeing torture, that they don't think anyone would be able to withstand them telling their stories. So there's distrust to begin with. Another huge issue is the expediency to get home. When they are demobilizing, when they're going through that out-processing center after they land on American soil, they don't want to say they have any signs or symptoms or illnesses or anything, because if you say you got something, that'll hold them up from getting home. They'll say, okay, you need to see these docs, you need to get these testings, you had to do. They don't want to stay for that. They just want to get home. So as they out-process, they tell everybody everything's fine. So because of wanting to get home, they'll deny the stuff that's going on. There's also a fear that if you want to talk to them as a civilian, that they'll be pressured to disclose secret things that they're not able to disclose. I know for myself, I know a Navy SEAL, and he couldn't even tell me as a chaplain where he was, never mind what he did. I had no, quote, need to know. So they're afraid people might want to know secret things that they just cannot tell people. It's TSI, top secret information. And the biggest thing is career impact. Many, many, many warriors are so afraid that if they get help, they can lose their security clearance. And in the past, that happened. Even though now legally, if you go get counseling for something that's related to deployment war issues, it is not going to affect your security clearance. They still don't believe it. And many people need that security clearance for their jobs. They'll lose their job overnight if they don't have that security clearance. So they're afraid if they get help that will affect their careers. So we can be a hard group to get to know, but they desperately, desperately need people to help them. Let's look now at a few of the injuries that some of our warriors come home with. Most warriors Most warriors will have some of these symptoms, like an inability to sleep, confusion, hyper-alertness, where they're looking around 180 degrees, always scanning the horizon, seeing who's where. They have depression. They isolate. They're angry. They have impaired memory, lack of concentration, fatigue. All of these things are very, very common. But one of the things I want you to know, I don't want you to think that your job is to make a clinical diagnosis. I just want to give you some signs, some symptoms that you can be aware of, that you can know, what might be going on and a need for referral, to refer to appropriate personnel. One of the huge injuries that we're facing today, especially from all the IEDs going off, is TBI, traumatic brain injury. If brain tissue is damaged with a blow to the head. But what's the problem with TBI? So many of these symptoms are subtle, and they can be confused with other symptoms like depression, moodiness, personality changes. It's so subtle that so often it goes undiagnosed. And so it's important to recognize if they were by a blast of any kind, they could have a TBI that's not diagnosed. Huge, huge issue is post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder. What I define it as is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. That this is what you might understand in what post-traumatic stress disorder, and this is flashbacks that people have. Flashbacks can be triggered by sight, sound, or smell that brings back the trauma. And so often, these people have been under such stress for so long, it's an automatic response. It's funny, but it's not. But we've heard over and over of if there's a loud bang, like a dish dropping, a car backfiring, you can see a warrior under a table at a restaurant or under a church pew in a heartbeat because that was their trained automatic response. That's what happens to them. A lot of times with PTSD, they're hyper alert. They're looking around 180 degrees. If you have a warrior that comes back and goes to your church, I know exactly where they're going to sit. They're going to sit in the last pew in the far corner so they can scan the horizon to make sure they check out the entire crowd. Another issue with PTSD is night terrors, lashing out when they're asleep. Sometimes it's dangerous for their spouse to be in bed with them because they lash out so much. They're still fighting the war. They're fighting the combat while they're in bed. I know in one of my churches, I had this sweet elderly lady, and this was a Vietnam incident where he had recently come home from war. He was sleeping, and she just went to touch him on the shoulder to wake him up. Automatic response. He rolled over and slugged her and broke her nose. It was just an automatic response that's what happens when they come back. Now, the good news is, if we get early intervention and stress management strategies, we can keep these problems from worsening. It's wonderful if we can get the intervention to these people early on. Huge issue, depression and suicide. As I talked about the intimacy, we can't imagine the intimacy these people face when they're deployed. When you come home as a reservist and you go to East Podunk, people don't even know what the war was about. And so they're missing that intimacy. They're grieving the loss of their friends. They're grieving their mission, their high-intensity mission, thinking they're making a difference in the world. The depression is off the charts. But one of the hugest reasons we're having this webinar and why I'm so grateful for you being on this conference today is because of the issue of suicide. And it is huge, and especially in the reserves. And it's affecting every rank, from corporal to colonel. I can't tell you how many colonels have taken their own lives in the last couple of years. They feel so alone, so isolated. They're not getting connected with the care. The intensity of the internal struggle is off the charts. It's estimated, as we've said, more vets will die from suicide than killed in combat. We as a church have to reach out. A huge issue to be aware of is if you hear of a veteran that just had a relationship breakup, that is a number one indicator. So many people had relationships that break up, And that is an indicator, not that everyone will commit suicide, but that's a huge indicator for many, many people. It's a stressor that puts them over the edge. Then, of course, there's other things like a family history of suicide, previous attempt. If they've had many losses, like loss of their battle buddies, if they've had financial losses, if all those stresses are adding up, if they're isolating, be aware. The Marines have a motto of leave no man behind. What I've said around the country is if you don't leave them behind in war, don't leave them behind at home. If you, as a civilian, don't know how to reach out, get somebody in their branch of service to reach out to them, to bring them to some place to get help if you're worried about their isolation and what they're doing. Get somebody to get them the help they need. We have another issue nowadays. There's not a lot of women serving, but we still have a number of women serving nowadays. It's still a minority. But one of the hugest issues going on now is military sexual trauma. It's horrific, absolutely horrific. Of 160,000 women that have served, a third of these women have reported being victimized by rape or attempted rape by their fellow service members. They can have post-traumatic stress disorder just from that. So if you have women veterans, they also can be walking around with other issues as well. Be aware of that fact. And finally, the substance abuse, as I said. So often, they will just down the alcohol to try to anesthetize all of these feelings. So those are just some of the things, but one of the hugest ones that I want to focus on for a minute is the moral injury. This is a whole new injury that just came out in 2009 that they're recognizing, because this war is different. In the past, in other wars, we shoot the enemy shoots us, and there were common grounds for war, and we knew the rules of engagement. Nowadays, we're supposed to uphold our rules of engagement, and the enemy doesn't. There is no rules of engagement. Moral injury is defined as the extreme distress brought about by perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. It contributes significantly to clinical depression, addiction, violent behavior, and suicide, and it may sometimes precipitate or intensify PTSD. It's different from PTSD. It's possible to have one, or it's possible to have both. PTSD is a reaction to danger. It has identifiable trauma symptoms, such as flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance. Moral injury is an inner conflict over judging actions. And the judgments pertain not only to active behavior, such as killing, but also to passive behavior, such as failing to prevent harm or witnessing a close friend being slain. Moral injury can also involve feeling betrayed by persons in authority. I've known Marines that have been ordered to do things that were totally against their moral religious values. Even when an action may have saved someone's life or felt right at the time, the veteran can feel so much remorse, so much guilt for having to inflict harm that it violates their inner values. Just having to view and handle human remains can sometimes cause moral injury. What's the aftermath of it? They can have what I call acidic shame. There's this shame that gnaws and eats away at them like you can't imagine. They think, I'm evil, I'm a terrible person, I'm unforgivable. They have guilt, they have anxiety, they have anger because they betrayed their moral values. How does it show up? They can feel purposeless in life. They have social instability caused by a breakdown in their standards and values. They withdraw from life. They are self-harming. They have suicidal ideations or attempts because the pain is so great. They do tons of alcohol or drugs trying to anesthetize all that feelings. But what's highly important, maybe you're getting that this is a real emphasis, Traditional psychotherapy not only does not work, it makes it worse. If they talk about their moral injury, it just intensifies their guilt, their shame, what they're feeling over it. What they need is the act of forgiveness. They need to understand, if they're Christian, the Lord Jesus Christ forgives them. But if they're not Christian, it's a higher power, that they are forgiven, and then to forgive themselves, that they were ordered to. They had to do it. This war is the most horrific war from Iraq on down, where women and children have been civilian combatants. They've packed with some dynamite and stuff on them or whatever, and they've had to do horrific things in order to survive that they were never trained for. This causes horrific moral injury. But if we as a church can bring in forgiveness for these people, it can save their lives. But this moral injury is leading many people to suicide. But what's important is you need to have a deeply held relationship with these people, therapeutic, to be able to get there. It helps if you're not able to do that, to know somebody, a therapist that can work on that act of forgiveness to help them in that field of moral injury. That connection is so important. So that's something to know about this huge issue nowadays, is the moral injury.
At this moment, we're going to pause. Shelly has really been giving us some good insights as to the impact of war upon the warrior. And just want to take an opportunity to offer you a chance to raise your concerns or your questions before we move into resources and tools that may be available for us as we engage in being the responsive faith community. Anybody have any questions, want to raise their hand? Just go ahead. We'll give you a moment for that. Oh, Noah, what is the best way to first approach someone in need? That's coming from Noah.
I think the best way to approach them is just casual conversation. Hey, how's it going? Just begin to get to know the person, that they don't want someone to give them therapy right off the bat. They need somebody to know that they can trust. So I think if someone's in need, say, how's it going? What's going on for you? What helps is we're going to give you some referral tools that once you get to know the person, you can say, hey, I know some great folks that can really help with this, and we're going to show you why some of these tools will be wonderful, where you can do a warm handoff and help them go to some of these places to get the help that they need. But the biggest thing is really relationship and connecting first to get to know them, so then they'll begin to share. It's building that relationship is the bottom line.